The silence in the Kepler station conference room felt heavy like thick fog. Admiral Jake Morrison sat at the long metal table staring at the alien beings across from him. His gray hair showed the stress of 3 years fighting wars among the stars. The wrinkles around his blue eyes told stories of battles won and friends lost. The Zephyrian ambassador Velthor clicked his bug-like mouthparts in what humans had learned meant disgust. His 6 arms moved in quick jerky motions as he spoke through his translator device. The machine turned his alien sounds into cold human words. Next to him sat the Etherean representative called Zix-9. The tall pale creature had no mouth but spoke directly into human minds. With thoughts that felt like ice water. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hayes sat behind Morrison taking notes on her tablet. She watched the aliens with careful eyes. Her brown hair was pulled back tight and her uniform was pressed perfectly. She had been to many meetings like this one, but something felt different today. The aliens seemed more angry than usual. For 18 long months the humans had sat in rooms like this one. They had listened to demands and threats. They had offered to share planets and resources. They had tried to find ways to live in peace with the other species that filled the galaxy. But the aliens wanted more than peace. They wanted humans to give up their freedom. The Drakmor Empire had sent their best general to these talks. Krexvoth was 8 feet tall and covered in black armor that looked like metal scales. His red eyes glowed in the dim light of the conference room. He had fought in 100 wars and conquered 50 worlds. To him, humans were just another weak species that needed to be controlled. Morrison looked down at the papers in front of him. The alien demands were written in simple human words, but they meant the end of everything his people had built. 12 colony worlds would be given up. The mining stations in the Centauri belt would be handed over to alien control. Human ships would be limited to small areas of space. No new colonies could be built without alien permission. The worst part was not the loss of worlds or resources. It was the way the aliens talked about humans like they were children who had broken the rules. They spoke of containment and correction like humans were some kind of disease that needed to be cured. Hayes looked up from her notes as Velthor began to speak again. His translator turned his clicking sounds into words that made her stomach turn. He talked about how humans spread too fast across the galaxy. He said they took resources that belonged to older and wiser species. He claimed that human expansion threatened the peace that had existed for thousands of years. Morrison wanted to laugh at the word peace. The galaxy had never known real peace. The strong species took what they wanted from the weak ones. The Drakmor had destroyed entire civilizations. The Etherians had enslaved whole worlds by taking control of their minds. The Zephyrians had stripped dozens of planets bare of all life. But somehow when humans built new homes on empty worlds, it was called dangerous. The Etherean Zix-9 began to project thoughts into the minds of everyone in the room. The mental voice felt cold and sharp like broken glass. It spoke of human nature being flawed and violent. It said that humans could not be trusted with freedom because they would use it to hurt others. The thoughts came with images of human wars from centuries past. Hayes felt anger rising in her chest as the alien thoughts invaded her mind. She had grown up on the colony world of New Boston. Her parents had been farmers who turned dead soil into fields of grain. They had built schools and hospitals and libraries. They had never hurt anyone. But to the aliens, all humans were the same. The meeting had been going on for 6 hours when General Krexvoth finally lost his patience. He stood up fast, making his armor clatter. His massive fist came down on the table with a sound like thunder. The metal table bent under the force of his blow. His red eyes fixed on Morrison as he spoke in a voice like grinding stone. The general's words were simple, but filled with threat. He said that humans would accept the terms or face corrective measures. He talked about human colonies like they were tumors that needed to be cut out. He promised that the Drakmor fleet would make sure humans learned their proper place in the galaxy. Morrison felt something cold settle in his chest as he listened to the alien general. This was not negotiation. This was not even conquest. This, was extermination dressed up in polite words. The aliens had decided that humans were too dangerous to exist as a free species. Hayes watched her commander's face change as understanding came to him. The lines around his eyes deepened, his jaw tightened. His hands on the table slowly formed fists. She had seen that look before in the moments. Before battles began, the other aliens in the room seemed to sense the change in the air. The Corven Trade representative shifted in his seat. The Theta Mining Collective speaker stopped translating for a moment. Even the Plant-Light Gamma Research Station delegate seemed to lean away from the table. Morrison stood up slowly. His movement was calm and controlled, but Hayes could see the tension in his shoulders. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of authority earned through years of command. He looked directly at each alien in turn as he delivered his response. He told them that humanity had come to the talks in good faith. They had offered to share their discoveries and resources. They had proposed joint colonies and cooperative research. They had even agreed to limit their expansion to prevent conflicts. But the aliens had mistaken human desire for peace as weakness. The Admiral's words were simple, but they carried a warning that made the aliens shift uncomfortably. He said that humans had offered friendship and been answered with chains. They had proposed cooperation and been threatened with destruction. They had sought peace and been told to surrender their freedom. Morrison picked up his papers and folders. Hayes quickly gathered her notes and tablet. The rest of the human delegation stood and moved toward the door. The aliens watched in confusion as the humans prepared to leave. At the door, Morrison turned back one last time. His blue eyes were hard as steel as he looked at the beings who had just declared war on humanity. He spoke slowly, making sure every word was clear through the translators. He told them that humans had traveled across the dark between stars to build new worlds. They had faced the cold of space and the heat of alien suns. They had carved homes from lifeless rock and brought life to dead worlds. They would not give up what they had built. They would not bow to alien masters. They would not go quietly. Into the dark, the door closed behind the human delegation with a soft sound that seemed to echo through the station. The aliens sat in the conference room looking at each other with expressions that ranged from confusion to satisfaction. Most of them believed they had just witnessed surrender. They were wrong. The emergency meeting room in Geneva was filled with the most powerful people in human space. President Richard Carter sat at the head of the table with dark circles under his eyes. He had not slept well since Admiral Morrison's message arrived 3 days ago. The message was simple, but it changed everything for humanity. General Patricia Stone stood at the front of the room, pointing at a holographic map that showed human settlements across 47 star systems. Each blue dot represented a world where humans had built homes and farms and factories. Each dot was a place where children played and families lived and people dreamed of the future. Stone's voice was steady, but her words carried the weight of coming war. She explained that the aliens wanted humans to give up 12 worlds immediately. Those worlds held 8 million people who would be forced to leave their homes. But that was just the beginning. The aliens would demand more worlds later until humans were pushed back to Earth. Dr. Kevin Park sat quietly at the table reviewing his research files. He had spent 5 years studying alien species and their history. His findings painted a dark picture of what happened to species that accepted alien peace terms. The Valerians had been a proud warrior race until they signed a treaty with the Drakmor Empire. Within 50 years they were extinct. The Nexus Collective had been master builders who created amazing structures across 12 star systems. They accepted limits on their expansion to avoid conflict with the Etherians. Their last city fell to alien forces 30 years later. The Stellar Republic had been traders and explorers who mapped half the galaxy before the Zephyrians offered them protection in exchange for restrictions. They vanished from history without a trace. Commander Rachel Davis spoke for the outer colonies through a communication screen. Her weathered face showed the hard life of frontier worlds. She had been born on Mars when it was still a mining outpost. She had watched it grow into a thriving world with cities and universities and art galleries. Behind her through the screen, Other colony leaders waited for answers. Davis made it clear that the colonists would not accept alien rule. They had not traveled hundreds of light years to bow to alien masters. They had left Earth to build something better and stronger and more free. The outer worlds were ready to fight rather than surrender their independence. The debate went on for hours as leaders from across human space argued about the best path forward. Some wanted to try more negotiations. Others suggested accepting the alien terms and hoping for mercy. A few proposed finding new worlds far from alien space where humans could start over. Dr. Park finally spoke up when the arguments became heated. He reminded everyone that running away was not possible. The aliens had faster ships and better sensors. They could track human fleets across the galaxy. More importantly, they had shown that they would not tolerate human expansion anywhere in space. President Carter looked around the table at the faces of people who had built human civilization among the stars. These were the leaders who had guided humanity through wars and disasters and the long, difficult years of reaching for other worlds. Now they faced the greatest test in human history. The president called for a vote on Protocol Omega. It was a plan that military leaders had hoped would never be needed. The protocol would activate hidden defenses and secret weapons that had been built in case humanity faced extinction. It would also send a message to every human world at the time. For peace was over. General Stone explained what Protocol Omega would mean for humanity. Military reserves would be activated across all colonies. Civilian ships would be converted to warships. Mining stations would become weapons factories. Trade routes would become supply lines for the coming war. The vote was close, but Protocol Omega passed by a single vote. Carter signed the authorization with a heavy heart. He knew that his signature would start a war that might destroy humanity or make them the masters of the galaxy. There was no middle ground left. Dr. Alex Turner received the coded message while his ship patrolled the Tau Ceti system. The message was just 3 words, but they changed his life forever. The die is cast meant that humanity had chosen war over surrender. Turner had been a merchant captain before joining the military. Now he would command one of the most advanced warships in human space. Turner's ship, the used Defiance, was one of 50 vessels that had been built in secret over the past decade. The aliens thought they knew about human military strength, but they had seen only the ships that humanity wanted them to see. The real fleet was hidden in asteroid belts and behind dead planets where alien sensors could not find them. The activation of Protocol Omega sent signals to sleeper agents across the galaxy. Mining crews began installing weapons on their ships. Merchant captains opened sealed orders that revealed their true military ranks. Colonial militias started training exercises that looked innocent but prepared them for war. Commander Lisa Hayes worked with Admiral Morrison to coordinate the response from their secret base on the moon. The base had been built inside an old mining complex where alien spies could not detect it. From there, they could send orders to human forces throughout the galaxy without being tracked. The aliens had made one critical mistake in their planning. They assumed that humans would fight like other species had fought. They expected desperate defensive battles and slow retreats. They thought human commanders would make predictable moves that could be countered with standard tactics. What the aliens did not understand was that humans had learned from every species they had met. They had studied Drakmor battle tactics and Etherian mind control techniques. They had analyzed Zephyrian fleet movements and Corvan trade routes. They knew their enemies better than their enemies knew themselves. Dr. Park's research teams began their most important work as Protocol Omega activated. They had been studying alien technology for years and had found ways to improve it. Human engineers were natural inventors who could take any machine and make it work better. Alien weapons would become more powerful in human hands. The galaxy would soon learn that humanity had not been idle during the peace talks. While alien diplomats spoke of containing human expansion, their military forces had been growing stronger. Secret shipyards had been building new vessels. Hidden research stations had been developing new weapons. Training camps had been preparing. New soldiers, President Carter addressed the nation from the Oval Office as news of the failed peace talks reached Earth. He spoke simply about the choice humanity faced. They could accept alien rule and slowly disappear from history. Or they could fight for their freedom and the right to reach for the stars. The president's words were broadcast to every human world simultaneously. In the outer colonies, people gathered in meeting halls and public squares to hear their leader speak. On Earth, families watched from their homes as their president explained why war was the only choice left. Carter promised that humanity would not start this war, but they would finish it. The aliens had mistaken human desire for peace as weakness. They would learn that humans were strongest when they fought for their freedom and their future and their right to exist as a free species in the galaxy. The message ended with a simple statement that would become the rallying cry for human forces across the galaxy. Carter said that the stars belonged to those brave enough to reach for them. Humanity had crossed the dark between worlds to build new homes. They would not give up what they had built. They would not bow to alien masters. The galaxy would tremble as humanity turned its back on peace and embraced the storm of war. The first strike came at dawn across 15 star systems when the aliens least expected it. Captain Nina Brooks gripped the controls of her modified freight hauler as it dropped out of hyperspace near the Drakmor listening post at Wolf 359. Behind her flew 20 other ships that had been cargo vessels just weeks ago. Now they carried weapons that could crack open alien battle cruisers, the Drakmor. Warriors at the listening post had been trained for glorious combat against enemies who followed the ancient rules of war. They expected formal challenges and honor. Duels. Instead, they faced human tactics that made no sense to their rigid military minds. Brooks led her squadron in a spiraling attack pattern that confused the alien sensors while her ships fired weapons from angles that should have been impossible. The alien commander of the listening post sent frantic messages to his superiors, asking for instructions. His training manuals had no answers for enemies who used freight ships as warships and attacked from 17 different directions at once. By the time he decided to call for help, his station was already burning and his defensive fleet was scattered across the system. Meanwhile, in the Vega system, Commander Tony Mitchell led a team of former corporate security officers against the Etherian communication hub. The telepathic aliens had always been able to read the thoughts of their enemies before battles began. They knew what attacks were coming and could prepare perfect defenses. But Mitchell's team had trained for 2 years to fight beings who could read minds. The humans used meditation techniques learned from Earth's ancient warriors. They filled their thoughts with false plans and imaginary fears. They projected mental images of attacks that would never come while preparing real strikes in the parts of their minds that stayed hidden. The Etherians found themselves facing soldiers whose thoughts were like mirrors that showed only what the humans wanted them to see. Mitchell's team struck the communication hub with weapons that had been designed by human engineers who understood Etherian technology better than the aliens did. The telepaths had never faced enemies who could improve their own inventions. Their shields failed under enhanced human particle beams. Their defenses crumbled as human hackers took control of Etherian computer systems, Admiral Morrison commanded the human war effort from the mobile command ship UES Retribution. The ship had been built in secret over 5 years using technology stolen from a dozen alien species. It was faster than Zephyrian scouts and more heavily armed than Drakmor dreadnoughts. From its bridge, Morrison could coordinate attacks across hundreds of light years. The Admiral studied the reports coming in from the first wave of strikes. Human forces were winning victories that should have been impossible. Cargo ships were defeating alien warships. Corporate security teams were destroying military installations. Colonial militias were routing professional alien armies. The galaxy's established powers were learning that humans did not fight like other species. Lieutenant Sarah Wells worked at the communication station aboard the Retribution, intercepting alien messages. The enemy transmissions told a story of confusion and growing fear. The Zephyrians were demanding immediate reinforcements from the Drakmor Empire. The Etherians were calling for a full mobilization of the Galactic Council fleet. The smaller species were beginning to evacuate their border colonies. What the aliens did not understand was that the first strikes were just a demonstration of human capabilities. For every ship they had seen attacking their outposts, 10 more waited in hidden bases throughout the galaxy. The colonies that seemed defenseless were actually fortress worlds where every civilian had been trained to fight. The mining stations that looked abandoned were secretly producing weapons and supplies for the human war machine. Captain Turner led his battle group against the Drakmor supply depot at Kepler 442. The aliens had built the depot to resupply their fleets during the expected war against humanity. They had not expected humans to attack their rear areas while their main forces were moving toward human space. Turner's ships struck like lightning and vanished before the enemy could respond. The depot's commander was a veteran of 30 campaigns who had never lost a battle. He watched his supplies burn and his defenses fail while trying to understand how humans had appeared so deep in Drakmor space. His sensors showed no signs of a human fleet approaching. His scouts had reported no enemy activity in the system. Yet somehow human warships had materialized from nowhere and destroyed his base. The truth was that humans had been preparing for this war for years while the aliens talked about peace. Every cargo ship that visited alien space had been mapping defenses and recording patrol routes. Every human diplomat had been gathering intelligence about enemy capabilities. Every trade agreement had been a chance to study alien technology and find its weaknesses. Commander Davis led the defense of the Proxima colonies when the Drakmor fleet finally arrived to punish humanity for its defiance. The alien admiral expected to find helpless settlements protected by a few patrol ships. Instead, he found a coordinated defense system that had been built over 3 years of careful planning. Mining platforms had been converted to weapon stations. Civilian ships had been armed with military-grade shields and weapons. The Drakmor attacked with their traditional tactics of overwhelming force and direct assault. They had conquered dozens of worlds using these methods. But the human defenders did not fight like conquered species. They used the asteroid belt as cover and turned the system's moons into weapons. They struck from hiding and vanished before the enemy could respond. Davis commanded her forces from a converted mining station that the aliens could not find among the thousands of rocks in the asteroid belt. Her ships struck the enemy fleet and retreated to hidden bases. The Drakmor admiral found himself fighting an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere. His superior numbers meant nothing when he could not find targets to shoot at. The message of human victory spread across the galaxy faster than the aliens could stop it. The species that had been pressed into service by the great powers began to question their loyalty. The Corvan merchants wondered why they were fighting a war that served only their alien masters. The Theta mining collectives asked why they should die for empires that treated them as slaves. Dr. Park's research teams achieved breakthrough after breakthrough as they studied captured alien technology. Human engineers proved to be remarkably skilled at improving alien designs. Zephyrian particle cannons became more efficient when humans rebuilt them. Etherian shield generators were enhanced beyond their original specifications. Drakmor armor was strengthened using human metallurgy techniques. The war's first month ended with humanity holding positions throughout alien space. The great powers that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years found themselves facing an enemy that refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. Humans struck without warning and vanished without trace. They turned merchant ships into warships and civilians into soldiers. They fought with weapons that the aliens had invented but could no longer match. The galaxy trembled as it realized that humanity had not been driven to desperation by the failed peace talks. They had been preparing for war while their enemies planned their destruction. The species that had reached for the stars would not be driven back into the dark. The storm had been unleashed, and it would not stop until the galaxy learned to respect human freedom. 6 months after the first human strikes, the alien coalition finally understood what they had awakened. The Drakmor Empire had lost 30% of its mighty fleet to an enemy they had dismissed as weak newcomers. Their greatest generals sat in war rooms staring at maps that showed human forces deep inside territory that had been secure for centuries. General Stone stood before the holographic display in the Liberation Fleet's command center watching the final preparations for the assault on Proxima. The star system had been humanity's first colony beyond Earth, but the aliens had seized it during the early days of the war. 800,000 human settlers had been imprisoned in camps while the aliens decided their fate. The Drakmor guards at the prison camps expected broken spirits and defeated colonists. They had dealt with conquered species before and knew that most beings accepted their fate after a few months of captivity. But these guards had never tried to imprison humans before. They did not understand that humans became more dangerous when they were caged. Stone's fleet dropped out of hyperspace. At the edge of the Proxima system in perfect formation, 50 warships that had been built in hidden shipyards across human space now moved toward their target with deadly purpose. The Liberation Fleet carried the most advanced weapons that human engineers had ever created. More importantly, it carried the fury of a species that would not abandon its own. The prison camps on Proxima's third moon had been designed to hold 1 million beings in complete security. The Drakmor architects had used their experience from dozens of conquered worlds to create escape-proof facilities. They had built walls that could withstand starship weapons and guard towers that watched every movement. But they had never tried to hold humans who knew that rescue was coming. Colonel Jake Peterson had been the colonial governor of Proxima before the invasion. Now he led the underground resistance inside the prison camps. The Drakmor guards thought they were watching defeated civilians, but Peterson had been secretly organizing an army. Every day more colonists joined his network. Every night they prepared for the moment when the Liberation Fleet would arrive. The aliens had made a critical mistake when they imprisoned humans together. Other species became hopeless when separated from their homes and families. Humans became more united when they faced a common enemy. The prison camps that were designed to break human spirits instead forged them into an unbreakable force. Stone's fleet engaged the Drakmor orbital defenses, while Peterson's people struck from within the prison camps. The aliens found themselves fighting on two fronts against enemies who had been planning this moment for months. The human colonists used improvised weapons and desperate courage to overwhelm their guards, while the Liberation Fleet smashed through the orbital defenses. The battle for Proxima lasted 18 hours and ended with complete human victory. The images of freed colonists embracing their liberators spread across human space within hours. Children who had been born in the prison camps saw the sky for the first time. Families that had been separated were reunited. The message was clear. To every human in the galaxy, humanity would never abandon its own. Dr. Park's research teams had made discoveries that changed the balance of power in the galaxy. Working with captured alien technology and freed human scientists from the prison camps, they achieved breakthroughs that seemed impossible. The Zephyrion particle weapons became twice as powerful in human hands. The Etherian shield technology was improved beyond its original design. The Drakmor armor systems were enhanced using human engineering techniques. The aliens had always believed that their technology was superior to anything humans could create. They had shared their knowledge freely among themselves because they thought no other species could match their achievements. But human engineers had a gift for taking existing technology and making it better. They saw possibilities that the original designers had missed. Captain Turner commanded a task force of 20 ships on a mission deep into Drakmor space. His target was the primary shipyard where the Empire built its largest warships. The facility was protected by 3 battle stations and a patrol fleet of 40 vessels. It should have been impossible for human forces to reach it, but Turner's ships moved through Drakmor space like ghosts, using navigation techniques that human smugglers had developed over decades of avoiding alien patrols. They used asteroid fields for cover and jumped between systems along routes that alien sensors could not track. The Drakmor military had never faced enemies who could appear anywhere in their territory without warning. The attack on the shipyard began at dawn when the alien crews were changing shifts. Turner's ships struck from 6 different directions using weapons that the Drakmor had never seen before. The human engineers had modified alien particle cannons to fire in rapid bursts that could penetrate any shield. The shipyard's defenses crumbled under the assault. The battle stations that protected the shipyard were designed to fight enemy fleets in traditional formation combat. They could not adapt to human tactics that used small, fast ships attacking from unexpected angles. Turner's captains had learned to think like pirates and raiders instead of conventional naval officers. They struck vital systems and vanished before the enemy could respond. Commander Davis led the investigation of the abandoned alien research station at Kepler 186. The Etherians had fled the facility when human forces approached, but they had left behind data that revealed the true scope of their plans. The research station contained records of every species that had been eliminated or enslaved by the alien coalition over the past 1,000 years. The evidence was overwhelming and horrifying. The Valerians had been infected with a plague that destroyed their immune systems. The Nexus Collective had been driven to civil war by Etherian mind control. The Stellar Republic had been betrayed by their own leaders who had been turned into alien puppets. Dozens of other species had vanished from the galaxy after accepting alien protection. Davis transmitted the evidence to every human world and every neutral species that would listen. The data proved that the alien coalition had been systematically eliminating potential rivals for centuries. The peace talks with humanity had been just another step in a plan to remove threats to alien dominance. The revelation changed everything about the war. The smaller species that had been forced to serve the great powers began to question their loyalty. The Corvan merchants who had been providing supplies to the alien fleets started sabotaging their own deliveries. The Theta mining collectives declared independence from their alien masters. The Gamma research stations offered their services to the human forces. Admiral Morrison realized that humanity had reached the turning point of the war. The alien coalition was crumbling as their subject species learned the truth about their rulers. The great powers that had seemed invincible 6 months ago were now fighting to save themselves from complete destruction. The final phase of the war began when human fleets moved toward the core systems of the alien empires. The Drakmor Empire prepared for a last desperate defense of their homeworld. The Etherian Collective gathered their remaining forces for a final assault on human space. The Zephyrian Kingdom tried to negotiate a separate peace before their civilization collapsed, but it was too late for negotiations. The galaxy had trembled when humanity turned its back on peace talks. Now it would learn that humans were not a species that could be intimidated or controlled. The storm that had been unleashed would not stop until justice was served and freedom was secured for all species in the galaxy. The final battle took place in the Kepler system, where the failed peace talks had started 2 years earlier. Admiral Morrison led the combined human fleet of 300 ships toward the last major stronghold of the alien coalition. The irony was not lost on him that the war would end where it had begun with aliens. Underestimating human resolve, the Drakmor Empire had gathered their remaining forces for one last desperate stand. General Krexvoth commanded their defense from the massive battle station that orbited Kepler Prime. The same alien who had threatened humanity at the peace talks now faced the consequences of his arrogance. His red eyes burned with hatred as he watched human ships fill the space around his fortress. Captain Brooks led the first wave of the attack using the same modified freight haulers that had struck the aliens 6 months earlier. Her battle group had grown from 20 ships to over 60 as more captains joined the fight for freedom. The Drakmor defenders fought with their traditional tactics of overwhelming firepower and direct assault, but human creativity had evolved far beyond alien understanding. Brooks used the system's asteroid belt as both weapon and shield in ways that made alien tactical computers malfunction. Her ships hid among the rocks and emerged to strike vital targets before vanishing again. The Drakmor gunners found themselves shooting at shadows while human weapons found their marks with deadly precision. The Etherian Collective made their final desperate attempt to turn the tide of battle using their most powerful psychic weapon. A dozen of their strongest telepaths combined their mental powers to project waves of fear and despair into the minds of every human in the system. They had used this technique to break the will of other species during past conquests, but the collective mind of 300,000 human soldiers proved unbreakable. The men and women who had crossed the dark between stars to build new worlds were not easily frightened. They had faced the cold of space and the heat of alien suns. They had carved homes from lifeless rock and brought life to dead worlds. No alien mind trick could break spirits that had been forged in the fires of human determination. Commander Mitchell led the assault on the Etherian mine ship using soldiers who had trained for years to fight telepathic enemies the humans filled their thoughts with memories of home and family and freedom, while their hands operated weapons with deadly skill. The Etherians found themselves facing warriors, whose minds were like fortresses that could not be conquered. The mine ship that had been the terror of a dozen star systems fell to human boarding parties who fought room by room through corridors designed to confuse and disorient intruders. But humans had learned to navigate alien architecture during months of capturing enemy vessels. They turned the ship's own defenses against its crew and seized control of the most advanced telepathic technology in the galaxy. The smaller species that had been forced to serve the great powers watched the battle from a safe distance and made their choice. The Corvan merchant fleets declared for humanity and began attacking alien supply lines. The Theta mining collectives turned their industrial ships into weapons platforms. The Gamma research stations shared their scientific knowledge with human engineers. President Carter addressed the reformed Galactic Council from the rebuilt Kepler station as the last alien resistance collapsed around them. The same room where aliens had demanded human surrender now hosted the birth of a new order based on freedom instead of fear. The president's words were broadcast to every world in the galaxy as he outlined humanity's vision for the future. There would be no empires built on the bones of conquered species. There would be no enforced hierarchies that kept some beings in chains while others lived in luxury. There would be no systematic suppression of emerging civilizations that dared to reach for the stars. The galaxy would be governed by consent, rather than coercion, and by cooperation rather than conquest. The former alien overlords faced a choice that humanity had once confronted. They could adapt to the new reality or face extinction as isolated remnants of their former empires. Most chose adaptation when they realized that human leadership offered something their own empires had never provided: the opportunity for genuine growth and partnership instead of domination and fear. Commander Davis oversaw the transition on the former Etherian homeworld, where human engineers worked alongside alien scientists to rebuild what war had destroyed. The telepaths who had once enslaved other minds now used their abilities to help coordinate massive reconstruction projects. They learned that cooperation produced better results than coercion. The Drakmor warriors who had survived the war found new purpose as peacekeepers in the reformed galaxy. Their strength and discipline made them valuable protectors of the trade routes that connected hundreds of worlds. They discovered that defending civilization was more satisfying than conquering it. Captain Turner stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance as it took its place as flagship of the new Galactic Defense Fleet. The ship's crew included humans and reformed Drakmor and grateful Corvans, and even some Etherians who had learned to respect other minds instead of dominating them. The diversity that had once been impossible under alien rule now became the strength of the new order. The Defense Fleet's mission was not conquest but protection. They would guard the space lanes against pirates and raiders. They would help new species develop their own defenses. They would ensure that no empire could ever again threaten the freedom of others. The fleet carried weapons that could destroy worlds, but its true power lay in the principles it defended. Dr. Park established research stations throughout the galaxy where beings from dozens of species worked together to expand the boundaries of knowledge. The aliens had hoarded their discoveries and used them to maintain dominance over others. Humans shared their knowledge freely and encouraged others to build upon it. The result was an explosion of scientific progress that benefited everyone. The galaxy that had trembled when humanity turned its back on peace talks discovered something far more valuable in the aftermath. The peace that emerged was not built on surrender but on justice. It was not maintained by fear but by mutual respect. It was not imposed by conquerors but chosen by free beings who understood that cooperation served everyone better than conflict. Admiral Morrison retired to a small colony world where he could watch the sunrise over fields that had been planted by human hands in alien soil. The old warrior had seen enough battles to last several lifetimes, but he had also seen the birth of something beautiful. The galaxy was no longer divided between rulers and subjects, but united by the simple idea that all beings deserved the chance to reach for the stars. The children who grew up in this new galaxy would never know the fear that had once gripped entire species. They would travel freely between worlds and learn from teachers of a dozen different races. They would build wonders that surpassed anything the old empires had created because they built with willing hands instead of slave labor. The stars that had once seemed like distant dreams now served as stepping stones to an infinite future. Humanity's greatest victory was not in conquering the galaxy but in teaching it the true meaning of freedom. The species that had refused to bow to alien masters had instead lifted others up to stand beside them as equals under the light of distant suns.